Let's now take a look at this reference and get some ideas when it comes to shading fire. For one, I'd like to point out that as we see fire in real life, as we perceive it, and as we see it captured through a camera, a large portion of this fire appears to be pure white. Now, normally in CG, good advice here, especially when it comes to, let's say, the highlights of an object or something like that, general advice is that you never push things past 1. You never push things past absolute whites because that gets rid of detail. However, in the case of fire, I disagree with that theory. And the reason why is because of exactly what I just said. Whenever you look at fire in the real world and whenever you see it on footage, most of what you're actually perceiving is just a pure white value, especially in these really hot areas. So as we shade this, I'm going to push this beyond a value of 1. In other words, I'm going to let things go to pure white. Now that's not the only thing that's happening here. A good portion of this is pure white, but we also do have some colors of blue, especially towards the areas that are really, really hot. And we also have a bit of yellow and orange going on as well. Now, depending on the fire and depending on what's burning, the colors of these flames will change. So if you were to compare flames that come from, let's say, a gasoline explosion, the color of those flames would change because of the matter that's being burned. Here we have logs, a solid piece of matter that's turning into a gas. But because of the chemical properties of that log, it's the chemical properties which determine the colors of the flame. And that's why when you look at different pieces of reference, depending on the wood, depending on the thing that's actually burning, the colors of these flames may change. And here's a great example of just that. Compare this reference to what we just had, and what you'll notice is that here we have the flames nearly entirely orange and red, whereas what I just showed you before was practically pure white. Now, the other thing that makes a difference in that is also the camera exposure. Notice how we have a very low exposure on this particular footage. And because of that, more of the color is showing through. Those values that were clipped at pure white are now brought down into these values of orange and red. So keep in mind that as we clip out these white values, those values still have some sort of color if you're to bring the exposure down. But depending on, again, what's burning and the exposure, as you observe references, that's why you're going to see different colors depending on what it is. It also matters how hot the actual fire is too. So to make things even more complicated, we have fire that when it gets really, really hot will change to blue, it'll change to green, and then sometimes the actual flames are colored pure white even when you bring the exposure down. So all of those factors combine to give you the color of the flame in the real world, and you just want to be aware of what that does to the shading and what you need for a particular effect that you're doing. Most of the time, I would say that if you want to make an impressionable, good-looking fire, you want to take these values and clip them because it makes it feel more intense, but depending on the project, depending on what you're doing, that may change. Here's something else that's interesting about fire. Notice how the actual brightest component of this flame doesn't happen until we're offset from the source by a little bit. And it's very obvious whenever we have this candle flame here, because if we look at the area, which we would expect to be the hottest, that is right along the surface of the wick, we don't have the most intense color happening right there. As a matter of fact, it looks a little bit transparent, if anything. So it's almost like we got rid of the flame right where it's at its hottest. And then as it approaches away from the surface, that's when it then turns into this really bright color. This is true not just for a candle flame, but for flames along logs as well. And something else that you'll find is that if we have a big bonfire, because the temperature of the flames get really hot, the flames that occur towards the source start blue, and then eventually we have this bright body of flame happen once it's offset by just a little bit. So let me show you what that looks like. Take a look at the colors that we experience right along here. See that corner of the log, how it starts blue and then it eventually gets to that bright white color? That's exactly what we're going to do with our shader. And also by doing that, it allows you to cut into the flame a little bit and give this semi-transparent wispy look to it, because that portion of black, which is happening where things are the hottest, will go up through the body of the flame and it'll give it a really nice look. If you just have a solid color with your flames, it's going to look really amateur and it's just not going to look as realistic as it could be. So we're going to incorporate that. It'll make your fire look way better no matter what render engine you're using.